Welcome to PayPod, the show that features thought-provoking interviews with leaders and entrepreneurs in the payments and financial technology industries. From credit card processing to Bitcoin, we cover it all. So if you want to know what's happening right now in the payments industry, stay tuned. Now, here's your host, Scott Hawksworth.
Hey, what's happening, everybody? Scott back with you for another episode of PayPod, the payments industry podcast. And today we have our first ever return guest, Adam Carlson, CEO of Soar Payments, is back to talk about another interesting topic, and that's payments in the firearms industry. Adam runs a business called Tactical Payments that focuses on that, and so he has a ton of insight to share on this. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me.
To start us off, can you tell us just a little bit about how you ended up starting TacticalPay and what TacticalPay is all about as we get into this discussion on payments in the firearms industry?
Sure, absolutely. So while we were starting Soar Payments and over the last 3 years while doing that, we had a number of firearms-related merchants reach out to us to look for merchant accounts, and we really found them to be great merchants. They've got the wherewithal to go through the process of getting registered with the federal government for their federal firearms license. And then we decided to kind of do an offshoot and build Tactical Payments to directly cater to all businesses in the firearms and self-defense / tactical industries that are out there.
For sure. And what was your thought process in making TacticalPay like separate from Soar Payments as opposed to, we're Soar Payments and we also do this? What's the benefit of that?
Our thinking was that by making Tactical Payments a subsidiary of Soar Payments was to basically just kind of create that brand that's focused around this industry, that we're really the experts in it.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's backed by the power and the reputation of Soar Payments.
Right. And it should be mentioned, you mentioned self-defense, you mentioned tactical things, firearms. It is also such a deep industry. So it would make sense to me that TacticalPay is the kind of thing that, no, this can support this because there is so much in this industry, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Every time I'm kind of thinking about Tactical Payments and other industries, like I can always kind of think of more and more as time goes on that we can continue to cater to.
Absolutely. So what is Tactical Payments' value proposition, and why should a firearms business choose you guys?
I think, first of all, it's important to note that we understand the industry. We know the regulations in the industry that have been put in place by our sponsor banks, by the card brand associations, and our sponsor banks like these types of businesses, and that a merchant's business is not at risk of being terminated out of the blue like you might see with a larger bank that has what I call fear of a reputational risk for dealing with these types of merchants.
Sure. And that kind of leads me into my next question, which is why are firearms considered high risk and, hard to place?
Sure. So a lot of the big banks that are out there like Wells Fargo, Chase, Capital One, they have ultimately decided that firearms to them is a reputational risk.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore they just don't want to deal with it. And now they're also the largest banks in the United States or the world. And for better or for worse, alienated one small subset of industries in their credit card processing isn't going to make or break those banks. So it's left a hole kind of in the credit card processing capabilities for some smaller merchants. I read a number of times that there's a big fight going on between a small gun shop and, I can't remember the name of the bank, but it was one of the big guys, and where they had basically turned off credit card processing out of the blue with no warning and said, you guys can't process anymore, which obviously that has, as a business owner yourself, you can understand
Sure.
That has a very large trickle-down effect of, hey, if I can't collect money, I don't have any money to pay my bills.
Right. Yeah.
It leads to a big old scramble. And, if it's a brick and mortar store, not everyone has cash. And certainly if it's an e-commerce store, then
Right.
they're up a creek, for the lack of a better term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this really demonstrates where a business like Tactical Payments can fill a need, because the fact is that firearms sales and sales in these kind of things like self-defense and all that kind of stuff, if the bigger banks concerned about reputational risk don't want to participate in that, that's fine. But then you still have all these businesses that need these services, and there's still a lot of money to be, to want to change hands and make sales and all that kind of stuff. So it makes sense to me that something like Tactical Pay could come up and serve people.
Absolutely. And again, as I said at the beginning of the podcast here, these are good businesses. They're heavily regulated, heavily licensed. They pay their bills. They're upstanding citizens. They're just good people.
Sure.
And, I've said it many a times in my career in the payments industry, like, it's not typically the industry that decides, in my opinion, my personal opinion. The card brands obviously disagree with me and prohibit certain types of business, restrict other types. But at the end of the day, it's the people in the business that determine whether or not it's risky or not. I mean, you could have a car dealership, and if the owner is a bad guy, that's going to trickle down and make that a bad business. Whereas if you've got a gun store owner, a gun range owner, and he operates his business in an honest and ethical way, his business is better than that car dealership, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that. I mean, if you think about it too, some of these gun ranges and things, they're local community stops, and they have consistent customers that come in, and they're going to make their sales and they're going to have success. So that's when you're looking at it from a payment processing standpoint. I mean, that's just a good business to be a part of if you can,
Absolutely.
So is there a big difference between who will offer merchant accounts for retail versus e-commerce firearms sales, and why?
There is certainly a difference. I don't think that there's a huge difference between the retail and the e-commerce, especially when you're talking about some of the larger banks that we've already talked about. It certainly is easier to get a merchant account for a retail firearms business, and that is due to a lot of banks and some processors not understanding the legalities of the e-commerce. It's just like they kind of go, oh, wait, you're going to sell a gun online and just kind of ship it to whoever, and you're going to ship it across state lines, and like, what are all these procedures? And they don't understand the rules around it, and they go, oh, don't understand it, not going to deal with it. So there's certainly more risk on the e-commerce side, but it takes, someone like Tactical Payments to help both the merchants and our sponsor banks to understand the process and the legalities on how the whole e-commerce sale of firearms and firearms accessories to make that happen.
Sure. Getting into the minutia of it, whereas, maybe a bigger bank or whoever, they're just like, well, we're just like not even going to touch this because this just seems sticky. But something like Tactical Payments, you guys understand like what's going on, and you actually, because you have this focus and you're like, we are serving this community, these types of businesses, you're incentivized to know exactly what's going on and then inform everybody, right?
Exactly.
So I'm curious, what other payments related technology do you offer to the firearms industry, and why, if at all, do they need it?
Well, one thing I think that's really cool that we've kind of pioneered, pioneered might not be the best word, but we've got some really slick POS solutions. And I'm not saying that we developed them, but we've developed partnerships with different POS solutions that can do anything from obviously processing the transaction, managing the inventory, giving the owner daily reports, all this stuff. And we've paired it with our credit card processing solution that's Tactical Payments backed by these sponsor banks that are happy to work with this industry, whereas you can't go out and buy a Square system and use it in the firearms business. They're just,
right.
They won't accept you as a business. And then anything regarding online or e-commerce sales, we've got our whole suite of fraud prevention tools that we've used successfully for a number of years over at Soar Payments that we're bringing over to the tactical payment side.
Sure. So just a lot of options. And again, kind of highlighting that for the POS system and for some of the more brick and mortar businesses where it's like, hey, you can't even get Stripe. So what are you left with? Where do you go? And then, Tactical Payments can come in there and help out, right?
Exactly.
Now, we've talked about why maybe some of these bigger banks, they are concerned about their reputation and things like that. And that's why they wouldn't serve the firearms industry. And, a lot of people working in the firearms industry see changes in business often around major news events. And I'm curious, does this affect the payments aspect of things as well? For example, if there's a tragedy involving firearms that makes national news, can that lead to changes that firearms businesses should be aware of? Like more banks saying like, we're not going to touch this.
Short answer is yes. Longer answer is I don't believe that it'll be anything that's immediate. I don't think that, God forbid there's one of these mass shootings and the next day someone walks in and says, terminate all the firearms businesses.
Right.
I think over the long term, as it continues to happen, and everyone is saying, hey, how can we stop these types of things? Obviously, cutting off the flow of payments is something that can be done. Again, I don't believe that it's immediate. I do think that legislation can be enacted. Again, and this would be a conversation for a completely different podcast, but I think our friends in Congress and in the Senate, they're not passing anything with any speed. So again, obviously, any types of these tragedies happening will change things over the long term, but I don't think that there's any immediate or knee-jerk reaction. But we at Tactical Payments are kind of always trying to keep an eye on where things are headed one way or the other in an effort to make sure that our merchants are well serviced and have as little disruption to their business as possible.
Sure. And being plugged in, if there were ever any changes or something that a firearms merchant would need to know about or something coming down the pipeline, and then being able to, because you are so dedicated to serving this industry, be able to say, well, we've got this and we can make sure that we're compliant here or we're doing this thing or whatever it is, right?
Exactly. You got it.
Now, this can apply to firearms businesses, but also other types of businesses. Some may think that they are too small or that a business like Soar Payments or Tactical Payments can't help them. There's some rural mom and pop shop and they sell just a little bit. Is that true? And if so, what's the level a merchant should be reaching in order to benefit from your services the most?
Yeah, so I typically say to most merchants that are, not in a hard to place industry, that kind of our value proposition in terms of just strictly cost. If you're doing less than $5,000 to $7,000 a month, you may be better served by using a Square if it's retail or Stripe if it's an e-commerce. But in your harder to place industries such as firearms, I think that our ability both on the Soar Payments and the Tactical Payments side of understanding your business, understanding its needs, and getting you a merchant account up and running and providing competitive pricing, that is ultimately kind of our value. So I don't think that in these particular industries that we're talking about today, that there is a minimum processing volume for someone to be able to kind of realize the advantages of having a merchant account with Soar Payments or Tactical Payments.
Right. It's like you said, they can't even get some of the services. It's like, well, where do I go? So it's not even a level thing at that point. It's like, I need someone to help me with my credit card processing.
Right. And there's companies out there that take advantage of that. And I've seen some price gouging. I know that we have some competitors in the firearm space. We've done our competitive research. We've seen how much they're charging. And kind of the one thing that we've done at Soar Payments is say, hey, we're going to give you the least expensive pricing that we can for your industry. I'll be honest, there's some times where I wish I could get it to be less expensive, but my sponsor banks say that, I have to have some minimums, at least until the merchant has proved themselves, so to speak, and, have 90 to 120 days of solid processing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the long and short of it is that's right there an example of really trying to serve the merchants. Not only are you providing the service and you're specializing, but then you're also kind of doing it with a mind towards, hey, we're not going to sit here and just gouge you because we realize you're sort of stuck between a rock and the hard place. And everybody knows that, but not taking advantage, actually working with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Our goal is to provide good pricing, great service, and we want merchants that will continue to work with us, throughout the life of both of our businesses.
One thing in the payments industry, I recorded a podcast a bit ago, and we were talking about win-wins. And one thing I've seen about this industry is that it's really, it works at its best. And when everyone is thinking, how do we win-win? How do the merchants win? How do we help them have success and grow their business and do all this? And then, of course, we win because we're providing that service and we're a part of that. We've got that partnership. And I think when you approach this industry like that, I think that's the way to do it for sure. So obviously there are different laws around firearms that can affect businesses, specifically depending on the state. Now, when it comes to providing merchant services, are there any geographical considerations you need to make when someone signs up? Someone signing up in Illinois versus Texas? And if so, what are they?
Yes, absolutely. So all states are different. You probably picked the two most different states right there. But
I did.
yeah, all states have different rules. Typically, as long as you've got a federal firearms license, if you're selling actual completed guns and even the parts to actually create or piece together a gun and or selling ammunition, you've got to have a federal firearms license. And one thing that I don't think that's we've seen it to be relatively the same across the spectrum, depending on the states, is even if you and I live both, say, in Texas, my business can't just sell you a gun and ship it to you. That is against the law. So if you were to purchase a gun from Adam's Gun Company, I actually have to ship that to another FFL holder near your home.
And then I have to go get it.
And then, not only do you have to go get it, but they will then run the background check on you to make sure that you're not a bad guy.
Right.
And so same goes for shipping it across state lines. That's one thing I can't stress enough is like, hey, this is going to another company with an FFL, and they're going to actually do the transfer, put the gun in the buyer's name, make sure that that buyer is a good guy, and that a gun is not being sold to someone that should not be able to procure firearms.
Does that up the complexity of the transaction at all, in the sense that there's more concern about like, well, I never got my gun. They never emailed me, because you're now relying on more people, and I'm going to do a chargeback because I never got it, things like that?
We have not seen that. Obviously, the more people you put into the equation, the more it, things can tend to get muddled. But, we make sure that all of our merchants have a process in place to essentially track that, especially if it's e-commerce. That's what we're talking about
Sure.
here. To be able to track that from it leaving their possession, being in the possession of another FFL, and then they are the ones that are responsible for making sure that that sale is in compliance with that particular state or local entity's rules and regulations. I don't think, as far as the chargeback risk, again, it's going to another business that has lots of reporting and regulatory requirements. So, it's not going to random guy's house in his pajamas and he's just out wheeling and dealing the guns. Any of these FFL shops, there's a very few of, well, I shouldn't say that. There are a few of them that are actually run out of a home, so to speak.
Sure.
But even if they are and they have an FFL, the ATF can walk into that place of business at any time and ask to see the books and records of all of the firearms that are on or have been in their possession at any time. So as far as, someone at that store taking the gun and going to the customer, oh, he never got it. Like that's just, it doesn't happen.
Sure.
Just because
everything's above board.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, I think, again, it's important to emphasize how Tactical Payments, how you understand this and how the system works, because I can see how that could get so complex. And then someone just kind of freaks out and they're like, this is shaky. I don't want to touch this. But then you can say, well, no, I understand how the licensing works. I understand who these people are and, you're protected and all that good stuff.
Absolutely.
So, okay, peer into the crystal ball. Where do you see Tactical Payments in 5 to 10 years? Are there any long-term projects that you guys are working on or overall goals that you can share, things coming down the pipeline that you think businesses might really benefit from?
Man, that's always a hard one. Sometimes I can't remember what I did yesterday or what I've got going on tomorrow. So looking out 5 to 10 years is hard for me. But I guess I could say that my hope is that our business is still around and we're still helping on the Soar payment side, the hard to place type businesses, on the tactical side, all things related to firearms, self-defense, tactical type industries, and that they're getting good value from our service and that all of our businesses are growing together. And that's where my goals are. And as far as other products that are coming out or working on, I think right now we're focused on mainly building our brand, building our business, building the reputation of Tactical Payments to match the reputation of Soar Payments. And, we're just going to keep on trucking and
keep going, just chopping wood.
Exactly.
I love it. And along all of that, any changes to the industry, any things, keeping lockstep pace with those and being up on that. And that's how you do it.
Absolutely. I mean, that just goes to, the comments or conversations we've already had and staying up on that and continuing to service our merchants to the best ability that we have.
Sure. So normally we like to end with our Fast 5 questions about the payments industry, but since you were already a guest, I figured I'd actually just ask 5 new business questions. So Adam, are you ready?
I'm ready.
What, in your opinion, is the coolest small business or startup that you've ever come across? And what did they do?
Okay, so those that don't know me personally don't know that I love to travel. Travel and cars and running businesses are like the 3 things that I wake up in the morning to do. So
Sure.
One business that I've seen that I really like, and I think he did a great job, was, I don't know if you've seen The Points Guy.
Oh, yeah.
And he built, basically a credit card review site and shows people how to accumulate all of these points so that they can fly to all these far-flung destinations literally for free or just using points. And he's done such a great job in building his business. Airlines are giving him free rides, just literally free, so that he'll write a review about their first class product or, and I've even seen him on news channels talking about, if a new credit card comes out or something and he weighs in his opinion. So I've just kind of I remember seeing him when he first got his start. So I think it's just really cool on how he built that business and happy for the successes that he's had.
Yeah, that's an awesome business.
We're in the same industry. We're just on the completely different sides of it. I'm working with the businesses that need to accept credit cards, and he's helping consumers get the right credit cards to fit their needs.
Yeah. You're an entrepreneur and have had some great successes. I'm curious, what advice might you have for an entrepreneur who wants to start a business and obviously they want to be successful?
Keep an open mind and pivot. I can't tell you how many times I've started a business and I'm like, all right, this is going to be great. And, you just you have to keep yourself grounded in reality. And if something's not working, it's not working for a reason, and you need to figure out why. And if you can't figure out why, then there needs to be a pivot in the business. And I can tell you from my experience across 4 or 5 different startups, not one of them is exactly the way that I envisioned it when I first started the business. But it's those pivots that continued to help find the correct way to go forward and grow the business.
I think that's great advice. What I'd add to that is being willing to pivot and being willing to pivot quickly and not being so tied to whatever your vision was if things are just not working. Being able to be like, nope, let's shift, let's change course and pivot and focus this way. Because at least from what I've seen is those that kind of wait around and they just try to make it work just the one way. That's where you get into trouble.
Absolutely. And I mean, also from my experience, almost every business I've been involved in has had no less than 3 pivots. So pivot number 1, pivot number 2, they may not even be the best pivot. So just having that ability to be flexible and just keep grinding it out.
Sure. What's the biggest mistake either you've made or you have seen made when it comes to business, and what did you learn from it?
Probably I don't know if it was a particular mistake, but the first business I ever started was a failure. And I learned more from that failure than the multiple successes I've had since. I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is basically, it's working with people. Some people are great and some people are not so great. And I don't know if I've coined the term, but I use it a lot, and that's trust but verify. So if you're working with, it's an employee, it's a partner, it's a vendor, it's a customer, and they're telling you one thing, I extend everyone my full trust until they break it. But, there is something to be said for casually checking up and making sure that trust is well placed. So trust but verify is kind of my advice there.
I think that's great advice. Growth is so important to a business. From a high level, do you have any general advice for getting a business on the path to quality growth? Obviously, there's specific strategies and initiatives for every business and niche, but when discussing growth at a high level, what might you say to someone who is stuck and frustrated? What kinds of things can they think about or consider when it comes to growth?
So I'd say, first of all, go back to the question you asked me a few questions ago, and that's being able to pivot.
Yeah, the pivot. Yeah.
The pivot. Your question's about growth, but I think, the expense side certainly is a factor in the growth. So, and as part of the pivot, you want to be able to keep your business nimble. So having a good grasp on keeping your business flexible by keeping yourself grounded in the expenses is something that every entrepreneur should know. They have to know your numbers. And if you've developed a huge staff for a product that isn't growing or isn't working, you've now made your business not nimble enough to pivot quickly enough to be successful because you can't, or you've run out of funding, or, multitude of different reasons. And then the other thing I would say is, talk to other small business owners. There's forums out there. A lot of the entrepreneurs that I've met and know, and I know I did, have had mentors. Talk to your mentor and then, read. I find that different books often they help you relax. They help you see things a little bit more clearly, and, you just can kind of put yourself in someone else's shoes for a little bit. And that might help unlock the next idea on whether it be that pivot or taking a step back and looking at it from the outside and saying, hey, this particular procedure is limiting my growth. And now you've eliminated that and you're off to hopefully great successes.
Sure. Last one. Adam, what's your favorite part about being an entrepreneur who works on a number of projects and businesses?
Man, there's so many things. Like, I like the lifestyle. I'm kind of a workaholic. Sometimes I can't sleep and I'm up at the computer at 2 a.m. typing, and my wife walks in going, what are you doing? I'm working. I couldn't sleep. So I like the grind. I love working with the people and the staff and the partners that I have. And, one thing that I've started when we spoke about some of the past successes I've had, that was a relatively large company. I mean, we had 100 plus employees, and it became not fun because it wasn't a startup anymore. So being the startup, I like the grind, the fact that, we've got a relatively small staff. All of them I consider friends, almost family. Those are kind of the two big ones, the people and just the general grind of making it happen.
For sure. Adam, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me on the show today. This was really informative. And Tactical Payments, it's really interesting to hear about them serving an industry that needs it and creating a payments business around that.
Absolutely. Well, pleasure to be on. I appreciate you having me.
Awesome. So that's it for our interview today, which means that it is time to award our Small Business Organization of the Week. Each and every episode, we want to highlight business groups and organizations doing great work advancing the interests of entrepreneurs and small businesses, helping business people connect, being positive influences in their local communities, and so much more. These organizations are nominated by you, our listeners. So if you ever think of one you think deserves to be highlighted, don't hesitate to let us know. Send an email to scott@soarpay.com and we may just mention it. But for this week, we are happy to award TIE or TIE Global. TIE Global is a nonprofit organization devoted to entrepreneurs in all industries at all stages, from incubation throughout the entrepreneurial life cycle. With a global reach and a local focus, the heart of TIE efforts lies in its 5 foundational programs: mentoring, networking, education, funding, and incubation. Several members have formed startups while at TIE and are now charter members giving back to the community. TIE's ultimate goal is to foster entrepreneurship, creating wealth for both the entrepreneur and the local communities. Since 1992, TIE has been supporting entrepreneurs by offering education, mentorship, networking, and funding opportunities. And they work to foster entrepreneurship globally through the 5 pillars of TIE: mentoring, networking, education, funding, and incubation. And there are currently 15,000 members, including over 3,000 charter members or mentors in 61 chapters across 14 countries. So needless to say, their reach is significant, and it makes them a fantastic small business organization to award. And if you'd like to learn more about them, you can visit them at tie.org. Many congrats to them on their selection. Well, that's it for our show today. Thank you so much for listening. And if you like what we do here, don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes or whatever your preferred podcast listening platform is. We'll be back with another episode very soon.
Thank you for listening to another episode of PayPod, brought to you by Soar Payments. Soar Payments is a leading merchant services provider for e-commerce, high-risk, and hard-to-place businesses. If you'd like to get the latest PayPod episodes sent to you automatically, subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher, or visit soarpay.com/podcast.